Next Gen fam, what's going on?
Up? Good afternoon. Happy Thursday, everybody. Welcome to Live with Next Gen HQ. We're pumped to be back with another great program for you this week.
We have just an incredible conversation, an incredible guest, and hopefully one of the themes of the conversation is going to be reflection and looking back, because as Dylan and I know, and the audience who's with us today always, we're 6 years in, just getting started. We look back at year 1, 2, 3. We're like, wow, who were we then? I cannot even imagine we're at year 10, 11, 12. We're going to look back right now, year 6, 7, 8. It's going to be, I can't even imagine. So that's why we're just super grateful for all the Next Geners who have been with us for so long. Shout out Paul McNeil. Shout out Adam Hornick. Shout out Sophie Barron. Shout out Grandma Rose, who is obviously on the live. Dylan, who else brings you back? Who else was with us from day one?
Oh, there are so many people. You know what, Justin? We'll get into this in a little bit. Dylan Smith, our guest, was one of the earlier mentors and folks that I connected with along this journey. Also want to give a shout out to Alex Vaume, who runs Pathlight, a company that Dylan has invested in. They just raised their Series A. One of the early guys helping us out, Justin, reaching down and adding value, pulling us up. That's what it's about, right? You never quite make it, but you're always looking to help those who are getting to where you are. And
always
we're so
being at that stage where you have somebody, a mentor that is helping you get to that next stage. You have peers that you're in the weeds with, and then you have the next generation that you're helping kind of bring up and in that co-learning environment. That's been really key for us, and I'm pumped to get into this.
Really quickly, for all of our audience members listening in, I know it's crazy. There are two Dylans coming into this conversation. Bear with us, all right? Next Gen Dylan, Box Dylan, you'll figure it out. We trust
no favorites. We take no favorites here.
No favorites. He's my favorite. That he's the best Dylan. I'll give him that one.
True.
So, Jay, without further ado, let's welcome Dylan Smith, the co-founder and CFO of Box, to the Next Gen stage. Give it up for Live with Next Gen HQ and Dylan Smith. Dylan, welcome. How are you doing today?
Doing well. More or less settled in. Definitely a crazy time as it has been for the last few months, but really appreciate you guys having me and look forward to conversation.
Dylan, thank you so much. Everybody in our community has been putting this on the calendar. They've been getting ready for this conversation. But as I'm sure you get a lot, the Box of today and the Dylan Smith of today is maybe very different, and it has had an evolution over time. I want to take us back. So you're at Duke. You're into online poker, talking to your friends about starting companies. Tell us a little bit about who Dylan was back in that day, before Box was even a thing, and back when you were, doing whatever you were doing.
Oh man, old school Duke Dylan. Would say, yeah. I mean, certainly. I went to school expecting to be a pediatrician, not get into business. So did pre-med, and still fascinated by medicine and kind of self-performance, optimizing, all of these things. But I would say that, all along, as much as, tech entrepreneurship was not part of the plan, I was always interested in both kind of business and how things work. Like if I had to guess and I said, hey, if I'm not going to be a doctor, would have guessed I would do something like management consulting, just because, anytime I would go to, a concert or, see a different business, I would always be thinking about, okay, what is the model? Where do they make money? And so I was always drawn to that type of thing. And also very, I would say, anti-working for other people. So from an entrepreneurship point of view, I think I had one real salary job that I got a regular paycheck my entire life. And so even prior to college, had done a tutoring business in high school, in college. Went off, and I don't know how entrepreneurial I would call online poker, which was floating the lifestyle and the early Box kind of investments, as well as a loft building business. So if you think about, maximizing space in the dorm rooms with some of my fraternity brothers, set that up. So those are more kind of brick and mortar traditional businesses. But one of my best friends, from middle school, high school, we grew up together. Aaron Levy, who's our CEO, we're always bouncing ideas back and forth. He was much more into technology and a lot of those trends. And we'd always go back and forth and just talk about different ideas, but it was always like, I'm not interested in that, or wouldn't this company just go in and crush that, or whatever else. And Box was actually the first idea that really clicked for both of us, and decided to really just kind of pick it up, run with it. Seemed like a great opportunity, really just a side project and thing to have fun with. And then, over time, as we move forward, found that we were, frankly, skipping more and more of our classes, having, more fun and learning a lot more, working on box versus what we were doing in the classroom, as it were. So much as that a phenomenal experience in school, ultimately just decided, about a year into the company, literally 24 hours before we were going to go on winter break, we just got on the phone and said, hey, like, what are we doing? Like, why don't we just give this thing a go? It's low risk, whatever. So within that 24-hour period before we had flights back home, ended up basically going to FedEx, packing up our entire room, shipping it all off to the West Coast. And then once things were kind of en route, decided to let our parents and Dean and everything know. Fortunately, everyone was very supportive. As you'd imagine, parents had some questions, but we were able to get them over that. And since then, that was late 2005. And then, since then, I've spent the last, 15 years kind of living, breathing box and going from there.
Dylan, that is so incredible. For anybody listening, Justin and I, we are very much so known to just throw ideas off of each other in things like this. Shout out to the Fresh Prince team. They joke that, hey, do you guys literally just brainstorm new ideas every single day? Kind of, partly. But something I think that resonates completely with our audience is you made a decision and you acted and you took that initiative. Talk to us about what it was like for you back in 2005 when, quite frankly, entrepreneurship and dropping out of school wasn't as common or as revered in some circles as it is today. What was it like being the lone wolf, if you will, doing something very, very different than your peers?
Yeah, I would say that's where we were just extremely fortunate. I was extremely fortunate to have a partner like Aaron. I think especially going through a lot of these things, learning as much as we could, was certainly helpful. I think there's a lot of a great community at Duke, and especially the way it's evolved over the last 15 years, it's now much easier to be able to find, engineers, like-minded people, all of that. But to your point at the time, that was not really a thing. And that was one of the reasons that when we did decide to move, we're both from Seattle. That's where we grew up. That's where my parents still are. Our parents still are. But we figured just because of the concentration, there was really only one place to be at the time. I think that's changing and may continue to change, especially kind of given everything happening in the world and remote work and some of the funding and pockets of talent that's out there. But at the time, it was really Bay Area or nothing, right? And so we ended up actually living in a little garage in Berkeley for about a year until we were able to raise venture capital and get our first small office down in Palo Alto. And then we just spent a ton of time, meeting with as many folks as we could, learning as much as we could. And that was really also the time that we were starting to, I think when we started, we kind of timed it really well in that, to your point, there was not a lot of, being an entrepreneur is not like a thing, especially for young folks kind of starting up. But right around the time is also when, and I don't know about single-handedly, but Facebook was starting, and actually we're able to hang out and meet some of those guys and see the very early office when they were just a few dozen people. And I think the kind of meteoric rise in success they had completely changed the thinking from a venture capital and everything point of view in terms of kind of taking people like us seriously. I would say that first, when we were able to get meetings with VCs or, other executives, it was almost out of like I don't know if it's pity so much. I think people always want to give back. And that I think is one of the great things about the kind of technology Silicon Valley culture. But we were definitely blazing kind of new ground in a lot of ways. And I think when we were starting up, was we really needed to start to see this first wave of, born in the cloud tech companies coming to rise.
Dylan, when you're coming back to your early days, that mindset, so many of our community members are there with us now. And oftentimes Dylan and I ask, why are you not starting? Why have you not jumped into this idea? And they give us two big reasons a lot of the times. They say, I don't have the idea and I don't have the co-founder. So there's kind of a chicken and egg. Do I get the idea? Do I get the co-founder? Your relationship with Aaron, getting started, what was going through your mind? Were you thinking, hey, I'm looking for co-founders. Here's my framework for what co-founders should be. Or were you more messing around with some friends and then all of a sudden things got serious and you had to formalize that? I'd love to hear for so many of our audience who are thinking about, do I need a co-founder? Should I have the plan? Should I let things happen naturally? Tell us about a little bit your journey there.
Yeah, so I would say for me personally, I was not looking to necessarily start something full time, leave school, any of that. Joke, I think Aaron was a little bit different. I think he went to school purely to just buy some time and figure out a valid reason to drop out. And I think he was just always wired that way. He had done a bunch of different things, kind of technology companies previously, more solo. And things like that. So we both had an entrepreneurship mindset, but for me, it was frankly more opportunistic. And even when we started it and I said, hey, that is a really cool idea, totally get this to work, it'd be really fun to build something together, let's do it. Didn't really overthink it, to be honest. I mean, even as mentioned, when we decided to pursue this full time, thought about it as hey, risk is relatively low. Yeah, we lose some time, but can always go back and whatever else. And so it was really just being excited about something and running with it. And for me, there wasn't really okay, I need to have an idea or a co-founder. They kind of, frankly fell into my lap in a single package in the box idea with Aaron. So guys, probably a little bit unique in that regard. But ultimately, I think, the thing that ended up serving me and I think us well is just, saying, what do you have to lose, right? I think it's one of the biggest things. And I think, a lot of this group, I'm sure, is aware. But I think especially, I think what I would call a misconception about entrepreneurship, and a lot of the kind of famous entrepreneurs, like Bill Gates is a great example. People are thinking, oh, they're just massive risk takers, putting it all on the line, risking homelessness or whatever. But no, they're actually calculated bets. And if you wait and say, okay, there's enough data here that we think there's something here, and we're kind of figuring out ways to limit the downside, then just run with it. And so that's probably the biggest thing is that I would encourage folks to do is say, what really is the downside? How can we mitigate that? How can you find, if you think a co-founder is important to pick up skill sets, like find that as quickly as possible in a low risk way and just kind of go from there. Because ultimately the team, the idea, everything is going to change and, be pretty different from what you start out with. So I'd say just, kind of keep your mind open and go for it to the extent you can.
I love that. And what a special relationship you both have. We want to get back to that most certainly. 15 years you've been building together, probably more going back to those middle school days. And that's not common, especially for tech startups, right? Every very famous, well-known duo that has co-founded a business, they're no longer together at some point along that journey. So I do want to get back to that. But staying on the early years, Dylan, it sounds like to this extent, the journey was very much so one step after the other. These are, okay, we had success, let's keep going, let's keep going. Talk to us about one of your earliest, I won't say failures, but hardships. Something that when you were getting started was a roadblock that you had to figure out or you had to sidestep. And if anything comes to mind, would love to shed light on that for our audience.
Yeah, so I'd say, we were fortunate that we started off with, real revenue and had some traction pretty early on. But after we left, I think we did start to see this rise in the space, the creation of digital content, and just literally dozens of competitors or ostensible competitors out there, not to mention our view that ultimately companies like Apple and Google and others would get into the space. And so, we really just struggled with, okay, we're building a nice business. We know the opportunities there, but how do we rise above the noise? And I think the biggest thing, and this was, credit to Aaron, was really pioneering in a lot of ways this move into a freemium model. And that was extremely, I would say, high risk. We didn't know what the conversion rate would be. We didn't know there was another way to ultimately, kind of get the momentum we needed to win in this space. And we didn't have the capital, much as any idea of the financial projections that I was building. My little spreadsheet was like, okay, you can have a 10x range of outcomes here just to keep the site up, right? And so there were literally periods after we brought in our third employee, who was more on the technical side and managing a lot of the infrastructure. This was a couple of years before AWS. So ideally that would have happened a couple of years prior, would have made our lives easier. But we'd literally wake up and every other night for a period of several months, the site would be down or we'd have some sort of issue. And it was, and so until we were able to raise capital, that time period where we felt like this was the right strategy for the company, but we had no idea if we could financially even do that viably, was one of the biggest challenges.
What a challenge that is. I can imagine in my head, you guys are like, group chat, this is down, who's on it this time? Yep. And what an incredible memory to have. Obviously, where Box is at today, incredible organization, incredible culture, like top of the market product. a lot has changed, right? Obviously, of how the team works, and things are probably a little more, legit and official in a lot of ways. What are some themes that have stayed the same? Whether it's relationship with your partners or your team, whether it's the commitment to the product, trying out this freemium model that was clearly like hey, let's maybe go for this. I don't know if this is going to work. What are some themes that you see that have remained the same from back then in those early days until now?
Yeah, I would say certainly one of the things that has been fairly consistent is that relationship with Aaron and how we kind of think about running the company. And I think that's one of the things that's worked really well for us is we have very different kind of opinions in a lot of different areas, very different skill sets. But I think ultimately what we're trying to accomplish with the company, the vision, the mission, all of those things, we have been completely aligned the entire time. And I think one of the things that we frankly unintentionally did at first as we were hiring people and then became more intentional over time was just being extremely kind of rigorous and thoughtful about the types of people that we brought on board, whether that was from the early employees to even our investors. I mean, we have VCs. One of our investors has been involved with the company and on our board for now, I guess next month, 14 years, right? And so I think we always thought about this as a long-term thing of, okay, do we want to be in, and one of the tests we used to use when hiring is, would you take a road trip, down to LA with this person and enjoy it, right? Because you're going to be spending a lot of time with these people. And so that's one is I think we have always had an extreme focus on culture. In the early days, we didn't write it down. We didn't have this, codified values and all of those things, but we just kind of naturally did that. And we're able to hire people who are really excited about what we're building. And I think another one is that sort of ownership mentality. And that is now that we do have documented, stated values, like most companies, but we try to actually live them and hire and fire by them, which is super important, is what we call be an owner. So not only and literally every employee is technically an owner in that everyone gets stock, so they have a, kind of piece and stake in success. But the way that we always think about, okay, especially as it relates to decisions, how do we empower people as much as possible, even as we grow, think of themselves as the CEO of their area. When we see things, and I think, and being very kind of mindful of and paranoid about some of the symptoms of that, I would say the biggest thing that we've been extremely paranoid about is, are we going to slow down, become a big company like as we grow? And you obviously need process. We're a publicly traded company. We have a couple thousand employees. But when we see, and there's a decision that when we're in our Monday e-staff meeting with our management team, and that same decision that we were talking about a week ago hasn't been made or hasn't made progress or whatever else, it's like, what is going on? Like, we cannot let these things fester. And so that, I think, is just one of the operating mechanisms that we've used to really just be, I would say, it kind of that be an owner mentality and that moving as quickly as possible is one of the things that we've been extremely focused on throughout the 15 years. And why when we look at companies, I think a couple of companies that we really admire have done a really good job of this, and we try to learn as much as we can from, are companies like Amazon and Facebook, even at a much greater scale. I think they still have that in most ways. And so that's been, I'd say a couple of the things that from a, at least culture, how we operate, how we work, we've been really focused on throughout.
It boils down to the innovator's dilemma in a sense, right? You want to scale and you need to be enjoying your success, but at a certain point, if you're not already thinking about what's next, then see you later, right? 2 years later, you're gone. Yeah. Dylan, you talk about now this organization, how it has grown, but how about you as a chief financial officer coming out of Duke, where, no offense, there's no business school undergrad, right? We never had the opportunity to get those CFO and training courses.
Yeah.
What was that like being at a very young age? Forget about a public CFO, public company CFO, but even hiring and growing that financial side of the organization. Talk to us about what you leaned on to support your development.
Yeah, and it's, I think very true that even where there are courses, I think in a role and an industry evolving as fast as Box and technology have, there's not a lot of things that are written down at all, right? In terms of how things are being invented. I mean, you look at the role of a CFO 15 years ago, very, very different profile than what you tend to see today. Whereas if you looked at, the largest companies or even tech companies, 80% were probably that, controller, chief accounting officer on crack. very much like, okay, we're running a tight ship operationally, we're more backward looking, we're doing all these things, versus now, and I think what my bias and kind of focus has always been, and I think now where you see the significant majority of CFOs and my peers, they're coming up through, you know, the financial planning and analysis world, the corporate development world, and really focused on strategy and what are we doing from a forward-looking standpoint. And so I would say that probably no matter what the offering or exposure was, there wouldn't have been a whole lot that I would have gotten out of those textbooks or classes. Did certainly have some interesting and very helpful kind of corporate finance classes, you know, accounting classes, things like that. But outside of that, it was really just kind of learning as we go and trying to be very, I'd say, introspective and thoughtful about, you know, what didn't I have the capability around, what might the blind spots be, and sort of building the team around me accordingly. And so I'd say the two things that probably, you know, I would give the most credit for in terms of, you know, helping me develop and grow and build an organization successfully, first of which goes back to the network that I mentioned briefly, which, you know, I think one of the biggest mistakes actually early on for probably the first year or two, we were doing the broad, you know, networking, let's meet investors, all of that. But it felt to me, and I was thinking about going out and getting coffee with a CFO, that's an hour that I should be in the office working, right? And so I think it was like, fortunately, you know, kind of changed that pretty quickly. And I think Aaron has done a phenomenal job throughout with that. But I think just, you know, a lot of the things, and even today, if we're wrestling with, you know, a capital markets question or, you know, how do we address this new compliance certification? It's the biggest thing. It's not that I go online and do research or buy a textbook. It's I'm going to pick up the phone and call 4 to 5 companies who are wrestling with something similar, who have gone through something similar. I think that's, if I say, okay, what are the most important kind of strategic decisions when we are at that fork, 80+% of the time, wouldn't have been able to make those, I would say, as successfully or as comfortable without having that network. And then I think similarly, it's just, I think, very fortunate that because we did have a really good trajectory, a strong culture, and we're able to raise capital, was able to overhire in some of those areas that I didn't have the expertise, that I could say, all right, here's your thing, run with it. Again, go back to the be an owner, like, you know, you're going to be hired second person on the ground for both, like our chief accounting officer, who's still with us today. He had been running a multi-billion-dollar revenue organization. We hired him when we were doing 10 million in revenue, right? Same with our GC, was our second lawyer on the ground, had worked at multi-billion-dollar companies before. And so I think our ability, and I think, you know, Aaron is phenomenal at this. And you know, I try to get people excited too about where we're going. And that has allowed us to, I think, in a lot of areas, scale effectively, because if you're micromanaging, you know, the marketing team or the controllership team or something like that, it's just going to be impossible. So I think it ultimately comes back down to, for me at least, was really building and leveraging just a really great network of peer CFOs, as well as, you know, kind of hiring the team accordingly. And just lastly, as it relates to, you know, kind of the journey and when we ultimately decided to go public, to be honest, I didn't think that was going to be me taking the company public. I had no preconceived notions. I didn't have ego around it. Figured we're going to bring in the gray-haired CFO. That'll be great. I'll figure out something else. I'm sure I'll learn a lot from them. It's all good. And actually, I remember this was a couple of years before we went public. So, you know, 8 years or so into the company, where there was just a board meeting we had, and it was kind of an awkward me bringing it up, like, hey, we're talking about like what we need to do to go public, the timeline. Should I be like reaching out to people? You guys interviewed people behind the scenes, like what's going on here? And they said, no, look, you know, we've talked to the investors that you've met with, you know, as a private company, you know, looking at the way we're running the operation, certainly there are areas that we're going to need to kind of build out to support you. But if you want to run with it, you know, you have our our unanimous support. And so, you know, needed to process that for a couple of days, as I just really wasn't thinking about that. But then ultimately, you know, decided that would be an extremely kind of impactful and interesting and exciting role to continue playing. And super glad I did. But yeah, I think it's been a constant evolution for sure. And I think also, you know, pretty unusual that a co-founder would kind of be in the CFO title, the CFO role broadly. But I think it's also, you know, because of Aaron's and my dynamic and the trust we have in each other, I think we've been able to evolve the role of the teams to make sure that, you know, made sense for us.
That's an incredible story. The audience is really the humility thread that Dylan, I think, is very obvious here. Is you're approaching these situations thinking, how can I learn? Who can I educate myself with? What not only older mentors or more senior mentors, but what peer mentors can I surround myself with? And those seem to be these recipe. Those are the ingredients of that recipe of how you're continuing to evolve. That we're still young. You're young as well. And while this is all happening, even younger. So that's how you were able to, I think, keep being in those roles. Of course, there are certain parts of the job that you like more than others. Going public was totally out of your mind. What are some of the things, whether it's early or now, that you can talk about where you really feel that state of flow, you really enjoy what you're doing? Maybe tell us about a meeting you're thinking about, or what's coming to mind when I say what's like one of the best moments of your day before or now?
Yeah, I would say that a couple of the areas that I really just love doing is like the planning, right? Like when I just think about like what is possible, not just like spreadsheet exercises, but okay, like what are the key levers? What are the inputs? What can we do to move the needle in Salesforce productivity, or how we bring this metric down, or whatever else, and really just kind of connecting a target that might be frankly a little bit arbitrary to start or informed by some data, and say, okay, this is what we want to do. Now let's operationalize a plan to get there. And I think working with the business to drive that and just have those conversations that are kind of mapping the strategy to some of the hard kind of number outputs, I really enjoy that dynamic. And I still spend, out of all the different responsibilities that I have, I spend the most time with our kind of our FP&A group and kind of thinking through those components, as well as the people team is the second one where I just love. I mean, a lot of things I would say it's a double-edged sword, or I guess that's both ways. Where the worst conversations, parts of the day, things that are just so painful, ultimately come down to the people, like the people issues. You just don't have, you don't need an HR team. There are no issues when you're 20 people, but like they just exponentially grow as the company grows. So that can be the most painful types of conversations. But also I'd say the most rewarding thing, and something that was not a big part of my job or what I focused on for the first several years, but now when I look back and say, what am I most proud of when I'm reflecting on any quarter or year, it tends to come down to the development of and kind of growth of the overall organization and people. And I think about myself now, especially as our organization continues to grow, is how do I, again, empower those folks, and taking somebody who's, that FP&A analyst who we hired 7 years ago, who is now running the function, kind of helping them along the way and seeing that, I would say, is the other part that I just get most fired up about in terms of the day-to-day job. And then, a lot of the pieces, I think, again, pretty fortunate that there are certainly, some meetings that I don't look forward to, but trying to, like when we're going over the details and nitty-gritty pieces of like SOX compliance and things like that, or, investor conversations, I actually don't mind. But, when you're talking to dozens and dozens of investors after each earnings call, by the time you get to that 15th conversation, it's 95% repetitive with things you've talked about in the past. So that can be a little bit draining. So the things like that. But for the most part, I think really fortunate that because of the way I've been given the ability and kind of latitude to build out my team and kind of reinvent the role to align to, what I enjoy doing, what I'm best at doing, where I can have the biggest impact. I think where I spend my time, and when I look at my calendar, when I wake up or the night before and say, all right, what's on the dock for tomorrow, there's usually a pretty small percentage that's like oh God, not again, one of those type things. So I've been very fortunate. And that's same thing with on the public side. I mean, honestly, the biggest thing that I wrestled with once we had that conversation I mentioned with the board was, I don't know, being a public company CFO seems like there's going to be a lot of grunt, really crappy work. Like I just really grow the business, do all those things. And I've been really pleasantly surprised by how much fun the role has continued to be as it's evolved.
That is absolutely incredible, Dylan. Talk about unique and completely separate challenges, but you have stepped up to the plate, said, I don't know much, I'm going to learn, I'm going to put in the time. For anybody who is into the stock market, just crushed the recent earnings call in June. Congratulations. We've tried to get you to the Next Gen Summit, but it's always the same week as Box's earning call. So here we are after all this. But Dylan, you mentioned your calendar. You mentioned when you wake up in the morning. I want to talk about Dylan, the individual, for a second, not necessarily the CFO. Because obviously in the workplace, you have had to lever up and learn and put boots on the ground, but also be a bird in the sky, seeing the whole picture, as we love to joke about at Next Gen HQ. Talk to me about how you were able to also still remain Dylan and grow as an individual. You're a fun guy. Anybody who wants to check out some of your dance moves can do so on Google. What were you thinking about? Where were you spending your time to get the most out of life?
Yeah, I'd say it's really interesting is I think a lot about that because especially with a work, a role and for having a job that I care about as much as I do, and you would be able to work hundreds of hours per week if you want to do, and most people could. And so I think it's just, to me, I am also, I would say, a really hardcore creature of habit. So whether that is, and try to use kind of calendar to set boundaries to make sure that I'm giving myself time to kind of re-energize, refresh, stay active, because I know I go crazy, if I don't kind of get out there, exercise a few days a week, things like that is just really trying to learn from. And again, I have like a weekly review and then a more thorough kind of monthly and quarterly look back at, okay, I run my life, and this is very nerdy, but for what it's worth, because I think it's relevant, is I have a personal set of OKRs where it's like, hey, am I doing my weekly date night with my wife? And it's like, okay, reflect on the quarter, like, oh, we only did 4 of those this quarter. And so it's like, it's a little bit weird because I'm actually applying metrics to and kind of running my life and my family almost like a business, which I think is not necessarily advisable for many people and, a little bit unusual. But I think that's something that's helped for me. And same with, just the way I structure, like it's the first, my morning routine between when I get up and when I ultimately kind of sit down and start plugging away. It's about an hour and it's the same thing every time. That is the meditation, the reflection, I feed the dogs, I do all this stuff. And then it's just like, and to me, it just helps me kind of get in that flow as well. And something that I've not been good with over time, but I think in a better spot now than I had been in the past, does go back to setting those boundaries and kind of, putting those, even just time with my kid on the calendar. It doesn't need to be a scripted day, but it's like, all right, this is the couple hour block each these days that we're going to be hanging out, having fun. And that was actually one of the big things that did cause me, I think, to get a lot better at this, is when we had our daughter, who's 4 years old now, is, that was a priority for me. It was not a previous priority, but, wanted to make sure that at least the vast majority of nights we're having dinner as a family, we're spending time together. And I think you find, I was like, oh my God, but how can I possibly free up the time? But when you're kind of forced into that, or it becomes important, and you say, okay, I need to cut the bottom 15% of work time that I spend. I'm going from working, 70 hours a week to 60 hours a week. You'll find a way to make that work, right? And so I think that's one of the things that I've always tried. I would say, kind of my life, like my calendar is my life, and a lot of the habits that I kind of, work through to make sure that, I am fully present, whether it's on the job, with my family, whatever else, is super important. And I think it's one of those things, I don't remember the exact phrase or know the exact phrase, and it's kind of cliche, but it's the whole thing. If you guys, some of you might have heard, like when you're on an airplane, which probably not doing as much of these days, but if you recall, they say, hey, put your mask on first, right? Because it's one of those things where if I'm not taking care of myself, if I'm not eating well, getting sleep most nights, and things like that, then I'm going to show up. I'm just going to be a pain in the ass to be around. I'm not going to be able to show up for my team, for my family, et cetera. And so that is something that I've been, that I try to keep in mind and really hold myself accountable to.
Dylan, I know not only from these comments that are coming in right now, shout out Julia, Alex, Mal, Rachel, but also from the folks who are going to watch this after, the concept of a life CEO is really resonating. And there are others who do think that's weird, not our tribe here, because next geners know that they are trying to build their life empires, be that life CEO, and they're one of the same. And so talking about personal OKRs, being a student of the calendar, as at Next Gen, we like to say a lot, study your calendar, because that really is a game changer. For the difference, though, Dylan, for you and maybe a lot of the Next Geners out here, is you were able to find that success with the company, for that financial success, business success early on in your life. That's not something that maybe we all dream of, but you really plan for how that will change. And from talking to you just for this little time, clearly a humility around you about your commitment to work and your future and your business. How did you deal with becoming successful at a young age when Box started to continue to really build momentum? Were there things that you had to change about your lifestyle or routines, or did you really try to stick with Dylan Smith, who grew up and was hanging out and building businesses? Talk to us about that evolution as that success started to come.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that there was either a lot of, pressure or, need or desire to change, frankly. I mean, it's one of those things where, okay, I can order DoorDash without having to worry about it, or get the grass-fed meat instead of conventional meat. A few years ago bought a house. And so there's things like that. But my actual lifestyle and all of those things really haven't changed. And I think that's one of the great things by, with the people who both in the business world as well as, in the friendships that I've had for, years or decades, is they kind of help you remind. I think this is one of the best things that friends and your, family network can do, is keep you humble. They remember when you were that pain in the ass, 8-year-old kid doing all these other things. And I think that kind of just, it's no different, like the way that we are, I hope, the way that, I show up. And I think also very fortunate to have had some really, really positive role models as well in, around, who I surround myself with, both friends as well as from a professional context. So one of the, who's been a phenomenal, I would say, business mentor, but also just great kind of example of how I want to lead my life is a woman who's been on our board. Her name is Dana Evan. For about 10 years now. She was the founding CFO at VeriSign, so to get from 15 people to a couple billion in revenue. And it's just outside of, okay, she's got 3 homes scattered around the world. Outside, you would have no idea, right? And when you talk about where she's spending her time, it's all about family, and she still cooks and prepares these meals, and every holiday has 40 people over, and she's slaving away for 2 days because she just loves bringing everyone together. And it's just to have the means and the lifestyle that, or a potential lifestyle and this sort of success that she's had, both as a CFO and as a board member, but to just be an extremely down-to-earth, caring, kind person who really does genuinely care. We'll just be catching up, as we often do, a couple times a quarter, and we'll talk about families and everything like that. And it's really cool. And I think some of it, as I mentioned before, we did try proactively to think about that and really work with, hire, get money from, et cetera, good people. And I think that's had, a lot of positive impacts outside of, the executive meetings or the boardroom. I think that really has, at least for me, helped provide those positive role models where, frankly, I don't feel the pressure to go live some fancy lifestyle, go do X, Y, Z, or have, the sort of success or lack thereof really change anything about my life. I'm still there, kind of showing up, loving the job. Could have, if I wanted to, and it were about the money and going and just, hanging out on the beach, could have done that, 11 years ago. And so I think it's been very fortunate. While we did try to kind of screen for that, and I try to think about that. Again, going back to it, just cliche, I'm sure everyone's heard 4,000 times, is you are the average of the 5 people who you spend the most time with, right? And so I do try to think about that, and it's the same thing where we kind of hire, and I think about who I spend time with accordingly, because life's just too short to spend time with assholes or people that you don't want to be with or be like.
I love this, Dylan. So many in our audience preached and they're saying, Dan, Christian, everybody, Alex, they're really resonating with the idea of it's your life, right? What do you want out of it? What do you want to do? Go grab it. I think that's such a powerful idea from you. You could have had, as you said, the retirement party a little bit earlier, right? Probably in your 20s, but that's not what you were chasing. But I think something that's interesting about you even today, Dylan, you are reaching to learn in new areas, whether that is through Box, through a new challenge, or through angel investing and exploring what that might be like. And you've made a few to date. Quick story for everybody who's listening. I remember the first time that I met you, Dylan. I was a sophomore at Duke. I believe I was about 20 years old. And I was so ecstatic that you had offered to meet with me and invite me to your office. I was shaking in my boots. Like, oh my goodness, Dylan Smith, I'm so nervous. And you came in relaxed, calm. It made me calm. And we had a great conversation. And I think that has stuck with me to show that, okay, CFO, public company, huge guy, very wealthy, successful, but he's still a person. And that is so important for everybody. And something that Justin and I have to remind ourselves of, that we're CEOs of a company, but we're still Dylan and Justin. And that does not change ever. So talk to us about in your life, Dylan, where you see yourself continuing to grow, whether that is through something you're excited about at Box, exploring further angel investments. What gets you fired up about looking to tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I try to, I mean, for now and foreseeable future, as long as the things that, I find most valuable and exciting about Box are true, don't have any other plans, find that otherwise, if there was this great other idea or I were trying to go start something else, I would just get frustrated because I'm like, oh God, I can't do it, like the time or whatever. And so it's still, laser focused on Box, and the areas that I think about are if I'm still learning, working with great people who I really enjoy spending time with, and able to have an impact, a significant impact on the company. That's what I care most about. Really fortunate that all three of those things are true today. So for the foreseeable future, I'm going to keep doing that until it's not true, right? Or until I don't have another choice. Right?
I love that.
And I would say that I have become more interested in terms of other kind of pieces is on the kind of angel investing side, being able to give it back, and just I love working with entrepreneurs and seeing what's challenges they're going through, see where I can be helpful. I think because of other priorities, I've not gone and been open to any sort of board roles or anything like that. But I could see longer term in a post-Box world. I do think that, not necessarily becoming a venture capitalist, but, an operating partner who, does work with these types of companies, or just doing, angel investing and sitting on boards or whatever like that. I just love to learn kind of about new industries, business models, things like that. So that's something that continues to fascinate me, as it did, pre-Box, as I was talking about earlier. And also think there's just so much now, again, in such a fortunate position that we can, especially, at a time like this, has been an even kind of bigger kick in the pants around just the ways that we can kind of give some of that back and use a lot of those operational lessons, and even work with the entrepreneurs, because they are entrepreneurs at some of the local nonprofits. So actually, my wife runs an organization that does something similar, sits on a lot of kind of foundation boards. I think that's exposed me to just how much opportunity there is to make a difference, and how broken certain parts of our system are. And so that's something that I've been spending more time in, and we've been kind of rallying and kind of using our networks and what we can do on that front. So I think that can be kind of related to the other piece. But those are, I think, some of the areas. I don't see a world where I start. I don't know if that's fair. So maybe this is not totally true, but I don't think I will ultimately build another tech company, from the ground up, or even say, hey, I'm going to join, a few years in, be the CFO to take the public. Like, that's just not my thing, because if I wanted to be a CFO, there's no better place to do that than Box, where I have such an amazing role, have worked with these people in a lot of cases for a decade plus, have so much passion for what we're building, that I think if I, in a post-Box world, I think it'll be something, completely different.
Dylan, you're going to be back on Live with Next Gen HQ, as if and when those roles continue to evolve, your leadership continues to evolve. We're going to have you here. Dylan, unfortunately, I am looking at this clock. I cannot even believe it. Looking at advice for our audience as they're walking away from this, Dylan, you're a habits guy. You have the habits on the spreadsheets. You're very, very thorough on figuring out how can I optimize to have the greatest life that I can be. If you're going back to the Dylan when he's just getting started with this adventure, what are some of those habits, those frameworks, those routines, whatever it might be, that you'd want to really say, Dylan, pay attention, man, pay attention. Here's something to focus on.
Yeah, I would say that one is probably in the category of, call it, health, energy, where, at least for me, the difference between having a, the kind of diet lifestyle that I do, find that it just allows me to show up and actually now prioritize that, which I didn't always do, be cutting sleep or just grabbing fast food or whatever else. So that's a pretty tactical habit. But I think from a more impactful point of view, does kind of connect back to that whole concept of, whether it's a weekly review or just, going back and saying, especially as, I'm sure everyone's lives, their roles are going to evolve so quickly, is just really trying to be realistic and get feedback from people as well around like, hey, am I spending my time in the most impactful areas? Should I be doing something else? I think one of the hardest things, and didn't talk about this, but something that I did a poor job of, is I really struggled moving from what I would call that player coach role into, spending my time and thinking of myself more as a pure manager and leader, where there are certain things, and I mentioned how much I love, building the models and thinking about where the business is going. I think because of that, and because I was really good at it, I ultimately was like the single owner of our corporate model for probably years more than I should have, right? Because I was good at it, I enjoy doing it, but big picture, as the organization evolved, that was probably not the best spot for me to be spending my time. And so I think it's things like that, is just always looking at, again, where are you spending your time, where can you have the biggest impact, what do you enjoy doing, and just reflecting in some sort of regular basis, and that'll probably look different for different people. But I'd say that's probably the single biggest habit that has helped me grow.
That self-awareness is so key, Dylan. We love that. Everyone in the audience resonating with that. Before we let you go, where can folks find you online? Are you on the Instagrams, the Twitters of the world? How can they learn more about what you're building at Box?
No, I would say probably box.com is the
it's a good one.
Not really on social media. I have the accounts and I use Twitter to consume news, but try to kind of minimize those distractions. So you're not going to find a lot of relevant information on the socials for me. But box.com, you'll always see the latest in terms of what the company's doing. So.
Love that.
We're looking forward to be it there. We're going to be there. Dylan, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for being here. We're going to have you back as these continue to evolve. Thank you for your advice. I think all the audience can take so much away about rigorous self-reflection, being that life CEO, if this is the life that you're trying to live. Dylan Smith from Box, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, really appreciate that. And we'll just say last kind of parting comment for everyone, if you do let these guys know, if there are any kind of follow-up questions or anything like that, I'll look to turn that around and respond so that I can be helpful. So.
Unbelievable. Thank you, Dylan.
All right. Take care, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Wow.
You could tell right away, this guy's a freaking genius. You could tell.
What a guy.
This guy is smart. And the humility he brings, I mean, you could clear right away. This guy is brilliant. Dylan is brilliant. And you can tell right away.
Unbelievable.
Humble.
I am proud to share a name with him. I'm sitting here, Justin, thinking, I wish I had a pen and paper. I want to be writing I'm going to go watch this back, take notes, because he's living the life that we dream of because he's aware. Not that he has made it anything. It doesn't matter. He's aware. He knows his priorities, and he's doubling down where it matters. Personal weekly OKRs. I love that he's like, hey, I don't know if people think this is weird. Yeah, I think other people do think it's weird. Clearly not us. And clearly not like, say more. I need the details. And give me the spreadsheet. I'll give you my OKR spreadsheet. Yeah. Yeah. Like, shout out Andrew on the next gen team. He's like, Excel is my flow. Those are the tactics that we're looking for. Those are what we're trying to do. Imagine the practice of every week and every month being the student of your calendar, shout out Malachi, and really rigorously looking into, am I spending my time? Am I spending my energy in the most impactful areas? Alyssa in the comments, I think, sums this up beautifully. I want to be Dylan Smith when I grow up. I think we would all be well served to pull a bit from Dylan and his experience in our own personal journeys. What a time. What a live with Next Gen HQ. I'm going to be thinking about this a lot. Next Gen fam, thank you as always for joining us. Shout out Julia, shout out Dan. So many Next Geners joined us for this conversation. We're pumped, and we heard it here first. We're going to bring Dylan back as he continues to evolve, as Box continues to be this just behemoth organization. Thank you for joining us live with Next Gen HQ and Dylan Smith. Peace.